The mining outpost floated on the edge of the galaxy, far from the safe worlds of the inner systems. It was small, built from metal and stone, nothing more than a collection of towers, hangars, and old shield generators. For years, the miners lived in silence, cutting ore from the rocks, sending shipments to the trade lanes, and hoping no one remembered them. But someone did. The raiders came first as shadows, then as fire, black ships with red lights, sliding through the void like hungry wolves. They struck fast, cutting power, destroying supply lines and leaving fear behind. Each time they returned, the miners fought with weak defenses, with weapons meant for breaking stone, not breaking warships. Each time they lost more. Now the shields were dying, the generators coughed and flickered, sparking blue light across the sky. Inside the command hall, old Commander Harris looked at the fading shield display and felt the weight of despair. His people were miners, not soldiers, and the galaxy had no mercy for the weak. "We must send it," one of his officers whispered. The old man nodded slowly. The message had been written long ago, a desperate plea, saved for the final moment. A single push of a button, and the call would go across the stars. It was a gamble. They knew the rules of the galaxy. Every world that sent an SOS risked not only rescue, but also invasion. Sometimes pirates heard it first, sometimes slavers, sometimes monsters. But there was no choice left. The shields would not hold another day. Harris pressed the button. A signal burst from the outpost, bright against the dark. Simple words repeated again and again. "This is Outpost 47, under attack. Shields failing. Send aid. Repeat, send aid." The words echoed across space, moving farther, carried by systems, satellites, and relay beacons. The miners watched the transmission vanish into the void. Then they waited. Waiting was worse than the battle. Every minute dragged like an hour. Every hour stretched into fear. Would anyone hear them? Would anyone care? Days passed. The raiders had not yet returned, but everyone knew they would. Children cried in the bunkers. Families whispered about escape, though no ships were fast enough to run. Harris kept his face stern, but inside he felt hollow. He thought of his youth, when humanity believed it was climbing high into the stars. Now he saw only dust and silence. On the 5th day, the scanners lit up. A signal had arrived. At first it looked like background noise, but then the text locked on. It was not noise, it was a reply. The miners gathered in the hall, hearts racing. No one spoke. They only stared at the screen as the message played. It was not the calm voice of the inner systems, not the polished tone of a Federation officer. It was rough, deep, almost like growling. The words were short, almost cruel. "Message received," the voice said. "Stand by," then silence again. The hall felt colder. People looked at each other, their hope mixed with fear. Who had answered? What kind of being sent such a reply? No promise of help, no fleet, no supplies, just 2 words. Stand by. Rumors spread quickly. Some said it was pirates playing a cruel game. Others swore it was the military sending their darkest unit. But a few whispered another name, a name carried across stories, warnings, and nightmares. Deathworlders. No one wanted to believe it. The Deathworlders were not allies, not rescuers. They came from planets where storms tore mountains apart, where beasts hunted men, where survival was blood and fire. Other races called them cursed, too violent, too savage. If they had answered the SOS, then help would not come as gentle hands. It would come as claws, as teeth, as weapons that burned brighter than suns. Command. Arthur Harris listened to the whispers, his face unreadable. He had heard the stories too, ships that vanished after Deathworlders arrived, planets that were left in silence. But he also knew one truth. No one else had answered, and the miners had no strength to refuse. That night the people of the outpost stood under the flickering shields, looking up at the stars. Some prayed, some cursed, some prepared weapons that would not matter. Above them the void stretched endless, waiting. Somewhere out there, something was coming, not aid, not mercy, but something dangerous. The SOS had been heard, and the Deathworlders were on their way. The days after the strange reply felt endless. The miners worked with quiet fear, repairing shields with trembling hands, stocking weapons that could never win a fight. Children stopped asking questions as if they already knew the answers were too heavy for their parents to give. Every eye turned to the skies above the cracked metal roofs, searching for a sign. Would it be hope or would it be death? On the seventh day, the scanners screamed. Alarms echoed through the command hall, red lights flashing against the steel walls. Technicians rushed to their consoles, their voices breaking with panic. "Object detected! Large mass! Inbound trajectory!" one of them cried. Commander Harris leaned forward, his old bones stiff, his heart suddenly beating faster. "Identify," he ordered. The screen flickered, lines of numbers dancing across it. At first, the system could not classify the ship. It was too big, too strange, too alive. Finally, one word appeared. Unknown. The miners stared in silence. Then, slowly, the black shape came into view. Against the light of the distant sun, the ship looked like a shadow carved from nightmares. It moved with slow, deliberate power, like a predator stalking prey. Its hull was scarred, marked with deep burns and jagged dents, evidence of battles survived, not battles avoided. The miners felt the weight of its presence pressing down on them even before it entered orbit. "This is not a rescue ship," someone whispered. They were right. It was not white and clean like the aid vessels of the Federation. It was not a transport full of supplies and medical teams. It was dark, jagged, and heavy, its edges sharp as blades. It looked less like a machine and more like a beast of metal, armored and hungry. The people watching it knew instantly this was not salvation, this was power. The outpost sent hails, dozens of them. "Identify yourself," Harris ordered, his voice rough but steady. No reply came. "Unknown ship, state your purpose," the officers repeated. Still, only silence. The vessel circled slowly, watching, scanning, as if it were judging the outpost and the people within. Hours passed, and the silence grew heavier. The miners began to whisper again. "Why doesn't it answer? Are we already dead? What if it's waiting for something?" Finally, as the sun dipped behind the rocks of the barren world, a voice filled the speakers. It was deep, calm, and cold. "Stand by," it said again, the same words as before. Then the channel closed. No explanation, no promise, no comfort, only two words that felt heavier than any speech. Commander Harris clenched his fists. If these were Deathworlders, then their silence was not an accident. They spoke only when they chose, and when they spoke, their words were sharp as knives. He tried to steady his officers, but fear was growing faster than discipline. One man shouted that they should fire their missiles. Another begged to prepare escape pods. A woman cried that they should kneel, surrender, show submission. But Harris stood tall. "No one fires," he said firmly. "No one flees." His voice carried across the hall, strong despite the fear in his chest. "If this is who I think it is, running will only make us pray." The ship moved lower, sliding into orbit, its engines burning with silent flame, its shadow pass. Set over the outpost, casting the towers and hangars in darkness. Children screamed, dogs barked, alarms rang again, but the ship did not fire. It simply remained above them, watching. Every hour that passed felt like a trial. The people slept in shifts, if they slept at all. They lived under the shadow of something that was not friend, not yet enemy, something far beyond them. Then, on the second night, the raiders returned. Black ships with flashing red eyes sliding fast toward the outpost. The miners panicked. They knew they could not fight again, not with shields failing, not with weapons that barely scratched armor. But before the outpost even fired a shot, the unknown ship moved. It came alive. Engines roared, thrusters burned, and the beast of metal dove down like a hawk on prey. The raiders opened fire, but their shots splashed harmlessly across its hull. The Deathworlder ship, if that's what it was, unleashed weapons no one had ever seen, bolts of light that tore through shields, bursts of energy that split ships in half. It moved with brutal precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Each raider ship was cut apart, shredded like paper before claws. The battle lasted only minutes. When it was over, the raiders were gone, nothing left but fire and drifting wreckage. The miners stared, their mouths open, their eyes wide. They had been saved, but not by kindness, not by mercy. They had been saved by a monster in steel, a ship that destroyed without pause, without fear, without regret. The comm crackled again. The same cold voice spoke. "Stand by," it repeated. And then, silence. The people of the outpost did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They only stood in the shadows, shaking. For the first time, they truly understood. The SOS had not brought aid. It had brought something far more dangerous. The Deathworlders had arrived, and whatever came next, there would be no turning back. For 2 days after the battle, the strange ship remained above the outpost. It did not leave, it did not speak, it simply circled in silence. The miners lived in constant fear, unable to rest, unable to understand. They had seen the power of the ship. They had watched it tear apart the raiders like a predator, playing with fragile prey. But now they asked themselves, was that power used for them or against them? Commander Harris stood in the command hall, his eyes fixed on the main screen. The image of the black ship hung there like a shadow that never faded. Every hour he ordered a new hail to be sent. Every hour there was no answer. The silence pressed against the people, heavier than any weapon. Rumors spread again, faster this time. Some said the Deathworlders were testing them, watching them panic, to measure their weakness. Others whispered that the ship was not empty at all, but filled with creatures bred for war, waiting for the order to strike. Children asked if monsters lived inside, with teeth sharp enough to tear steel. The silence made every fear seem true. On the third day, the ship finally moved. Slowly, like a beast stretching its claws, it dropped lower until it hovered just above the atmosphere. The sky grew darker, shadows swallowing the outpost, sirens wailed, but no one fired a shot. The miners knew by now that their weapons meant nothing. All they could do was wait. A signal came suddenly, a crackle through the comms. The sound made every heart in the hall jump. At first it was only static, a growling storm of broken sound. Then words formed, deep and slow. "This is the Deathworlder vessel, Iron Requiem," the voice said. We have answered your call. The hall went silent. Men and women stared at the speakers. The voice was not human, not soft, not polite. It carried weight, like stone grinding against steel. Every word seemed chosen not to comfort, but to command. Commander Harris forced himself to respond. "This is Outpost 47, he said. "We thank you for defending us from the raiders, Mayweni." He asked, "Your terms?" His voice shook at the end, and he hated himself for it. But the silence on the other end made the fear worse. Then the reply came. "We do not rescue," the Deathworlder said. "We do not give aid." The words cut through the hall like a blade. The miners gasped, their hope breaking apart. "If not aid, then what was this?" The voice continued. "We came because your signal reached us," it said, "and because weakness spreads like a sickness. If left alone, your death would invite more raiders, more scavengers, until the disease touched our space. We do not allow disease." The hall trembled with whispers. So this was not mercy, not even alliance. It was something else, something darker. The Deathworlders had not come to save. They had come to contain, to burn away weakness before it spread. Commander Harris swallowed hard. He had to ask the question that weighed on every soul. "Then what will you do with us?" The reply did not come quickly. The pause stretched like an open wound. Finally the voice answered. "You will stand," it said. "You will endure. If you fail, you will be erased." The words echoed in the hall. People cried out, some in terror, some in anger. One officer shouted, "That's not aid, that's a threat." But Harris raised his hand, silencing them. He stared at the screen, his jaw tight. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "What is your purpose here?" The voice was calm, colder than ice. "Our purpose is survival," it said, "and survival is earned, not given." "We will give you what you need to fight," the Deathworlder continued, "but nothing more, no comfort, no safety, no mercy. Your world will either rise or it will fall, and when we return we will see what remains." The comm went silent again, but the damage was done. Every person in the outpost had heard the promise. The Deathworlders had not come as friends. They had come as judges, as predators. The miners were not saved. They were being tested. Outside, the Iron Requiem moved once more, its massive form blocking the stars. Hatches opened along its side, and strange containers dropped slowly toward the outpost. They landed with dull thuds, shaking the ground. Inside were weapons, alien weapons, heavy and sharp, tools meant for killing, not defending. The miners gathered around them, afraid to touch, afraid to refuse. The message was clear: fight or die. Commander Harris stood above the crates, his eyes hard. He had begged for rescue, and instead he had been handed judgment. His people looked to him, their faces pale, their eyes desperate. He spoke quietly, but every soul heard him. "We have no choice," he said. "We will use what they gave us, and we will survive." Above them, the Iron Requiem lingered, silent, watching. Like a hunter waiting to see if its prey would run, or if it would learn to bite. The crates sat in the dust like silent beasts. Their metal skins glowed faintly with strange symbols, lines that pulsed like veins carrying fire. No one dared touch them at first, as if the weapons inside would burn any hand that reached. The outpost was quiet. Too quiet. Even the children stopped crying, sensing something heavy in the air. Finally, Commander Harris gave the order. "Open them," he said, his voice low. Engineers moved forward, prying the locks. The metal cracked with a hiss, and the lids fell away. Inside were weapons unlike anything the miners had ever seen. Some looked like rifles, but heavier, the barrels black as night. Others were long blades, jagged and cruel, their edges humming with unseen energy. One crate held small orbs that pulsed with red light. The air around them seemed to hum, as if the weapons themselves were alive. Fear swept through the crowd. These were not tools for defense. They were tools for destruction, weapons built not to protect, but to kill. Some miners stepped back, shaking their heads. "We can't use these," one man whispered. "They're cursed," said another, but Harris only stared. Red, his face unreadable. "They gave us no choice," he said. "If we refuse, we die. If we accept, we may live." The people argued through the night. Some said they would rather run than use Deathworlder weapons. Others said running was impossible, that the outpost had no ships fast enough. A few, their voices trembling, said they would rather die free than live under the shadow of monsters, but Harris silenced them with one question. "Would you rather your children die screaming, or would you rather they live long enough to see another sunrise?" The words cut through every argument. One by one, the miners began to take the weapons, their hands shaking. The blades growled when lifted. The rifles whined as if hungry. The orbs pulsed brighter when touched, eager for use. The Deathworlders had given them not gifts, but burdens, tools that demanded blood. 2 nights later, the test came. The raiders returned, larger in number, hungrier, angrier after their last defeat. Their ships descended like vultures, dozens of them, their engines roaring against the night sky. The miners panicked, but this time they did not run. They held the strange weapons in their hands, their hearts pounding like drums. The shields of the outpost flickered weakly, already half dead. The raiders laughed over the comms, promising slaughter, but the Deathworlder ship did not move. It only circled above, silent, watching. The miners understood. This was their trial. The Iron Requiem would not fight for them again. Now they had to prove themselves. The battle began with fire raining from the sky. The raiders struck first, blasting the shields, tearing holes through metal towers. Miners screamed as the ground shook. But Commander Harris roared, "Hold your ground!" And for the first time they fought back with weapons not their own. A miner named Jace lifted one of the heavy rifles. It growled in his arms, kicking like a living beast. He fired at the sky, and a bolt of dark energy tore through a raider ship, splawl, hitting it in half. The people gasped, the sound filling them with both terror and hope. Another miner hurled one of the red orbs. It struck the ground near a group of raiders who had landed. The orb pulsed once, then exploded in a storm of fire, burning everything within its reach. The night turned red. Screams filled the air. The weapons were terrible, but they worked. Each shot from the rifles ripped through armor. Each swing of the jagged blades left nothing standing. Each orb turned the battlefield into chaos. The miners were no longer workers, no longer victims. They became predators. They fought like people who had no choice but to kill. Still, the raiders fought back with savage fury. Ships strafed the outpost, burning metal, collapsing buildings. Miners fell, their blood mixing with the dust. But the others pressed forward, their fear turning into something else, into rage, into survival. From above, the Iron Requiem watched, its shadow stretched across the battlefield, silent, judging. The Deathworlders made no move to interfere. They only observed, measuring the humans not by their cries but by their will to fight. Hours passed, though it felt like days. when the last raider ship fell from the sky, torn apart by the miners' new weapons. Silence returned to the outpost. The ground was scorched, bodies lay in the dust, the air stank of smoke and blood. The miners stood shaking, their faces pale, their hands covered in ash and sweat. They had survived, but at what cost? The weapons in their hands hummed softly, as if pleased, as if feeding on the violence they had unleashed. Then, once again, the comm crackled. The Deathworlder voice filled the hall, cold and sharp. "You have stood," it said. "You did not break. But this is only the beginning." The people trembled. They wanted to scream, to curse, to beg for peace. But deep inside, something had changed. They were no longer helpless miners. They had tasted survival, and once survival is tasted, it cannot be forgotten. Commander Harris looked at the wreckage, at the weapons, at his people. He knew the truth now. This was not rescue. This was not charity. This was a test. And the Deathworlders were not saviors. They were judges, silent, merciless, unblinking judges from a harsher world. And the humans of Outpost 47 had only just begun to face their judgment. The battlefield still smoked. Ash covered the ground. Twisted wrecks of raider ships burned in the distance. The miners stood among the ruins, their new weapons humming in their hands. Some wept for the dead. Some laughed in disbelief. Some simply stared into the sky. They had survived, but survival tasted like blood and iron, not victory. Above them, the iron requiem moved slowly, casting its long shadow across the broken outpost. It had not fired a single shot, yet its presence had been heavier than any weapon. Every miner knew the truth now. The Deathworlders had saved them once, but this time they had forced them to save themselves. Inside the command hall, the comms flickered alive again. The voice returned, deep and calm. "You have endured," it said. "Your fear did not chain you. Your weakness did not drown you." There was a pause, and then the voice sharpened. "But understand this, humans. What you faced tonight was only a spark, not the fire." The miners listened in silence, their faces pale under the glow of the screen. The Deathworlder continued. "Out here, the void does not forgive. It does not forget. Every weakness you show will be hunted. Every mistake will be punished. This galaxy feeds on the fragile." "You sent an SOS," the voice went on. "You begged for rescue. That was your mistake. Rescue does not exist, not for our kind, not for yours." Whispers spread in the hall. Some lowered their heads in shame, others clenched their fists in anger. But no one spoke against the voice. The weight of it pressed too heavy. The Deathworlder paused, then spoke again, slower, sharp. "We came not because we are merciful, but because we know the truth. Weakness is a disease. Left alone, it spreads, it infects others, it consumes. We do not allow weakness to grow near our worlds, not ever." The words struck like knives. The miners were not allies, not partners, not even friends. To the Deathworlders, they were a potential infection, and the cure was brutal: either grow strong or be erased. Commander Harris forced himself to step forward. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. "If that is true," he said, "why give us weapons? Why test us instead of simply destroying us?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then the voice returned, and this time it carried a weight that made every soul shiver. "Because you remind us of ourselves," the Deathworlder said. Long ago we too were hunted, we too were prey. Our skies burned, our people cried for help that never came. No one rescued us, no one saved us. We learned the only law that matters: survive. The word echoed in the hall like thunder. The miners felt it in their bones. It was not just a word, it was a command, a truth carved into the Deathworlders' very blood. The voice continued. We saw in your message not only weakness, but a spark worth testing, a spark that might burn into fire. So we came, not to protect you, but to see if that spark could survive the storm. The miners looked at one another. Some were angry, some were afraid, but deep inside a few felt something else. A strange, dangerous pride. They had been forced into a fight and they had not broken. Maybe the Deathworlders were right. Maybe they were more than miners now. The Deathworlder voice grew colder again. Do not mistake this for alliance. Do not mistake this for friendship. We are not your shield. We are not your hand. We are your shadow. We will return. And when we do, if you are weak, you will burn. The comm cut out, leaving silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The miners stood frozen, the echo of those words still heavy in their chests. That night, fear and fire spread through the outpost. Some cursed the Deathworlders, calling them monsters, demons in steel. Others whispered that perhaps the Deathworlders were right, that the galaxy would never spare the weak. Children clutched their parents, asking if the shadows in the sky would eat them. Parents had no answer. Harris walked the ruined streets, watching his people. He saw their fear, but he also saw something new in their eyes. A steel that had not been there before. He thought of the voice, of the word that echoed still, survive. And he wondered if perhaps the Deathworlders had already begun to change them. Above, the iron requiem lingered for one more day, then slowly rose. Its engines lit the night sky, and its vast shape drifted back into the darkness. It did not say farewell, it did not promise return, it simply left, like a storm rolling away, leaving wreckage in its wake. The miners stared at the stars long after it vanished. Some prayed for it never to return. Others prayed it would, because now they understood. Their SOS had not brought saviors, it had brought judges, and those judges had given them a warning sharper than any blade. Stand or fall, survive or be erased. The outpost lay in ruins, but it still stood. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and oil. The ground was scarred, marked by craters where the raiders had fallen. Every corner of the colony bore wounds, but the people still breathed, and that perhaps was the cruelest gift of all. The Deathworlder ship was gone, its shadow no longer hanging above them. But its presence had not vanished. It lingered in the weapons left behind, in the whispers of the survivors, in the silence between every heartbeat. The words of the voice echoed in every mind: survive or be erased. Commander Harris walked through the streets, his boots crunching on broken glass. The miners greeted him with hollow eyes, some filled with fear, others with fire. He stopped at a crate of weapons, still glowing faintly with red light. Children stared at them with wide eyes, mothers pulled them back, fathers looked away. The choice was there for everyone to see, to embrace these tools of monsters, or to reject them and risk death. In the council chamber, the argument raged. Leaders shouted across the table, their voices sharp with anger and fear. "We cannot use these weapons," one cried. "They are cursed, they are poison. They will change us into Deathworlders ourselves." Another slammed his fist down. "If we throw them away, we are already dead. The Raiders will return, the Deathworlders will return, and both will kill us if we remain weak." The room shook with voices, but no answer came. Harris sat in silence, his eyes heavy. He remembered the faces of the dead, the screams of the living, the smell of blood in the dust. He remembered the Deathworlder words, sharp as a blade, "Survive." It was not advice, it was law. Outside, the people practiced with the weapons. The rifles growled when fired, their recoil bruising shoulders. The blades hissed when swung, cutting stone like paper. The orbs pulsed with light, dangerous even to those who held them. The miners were clumsy at first, workers holding tools too heavy for their hands. But each day they learned, each day they grew, and with every shot, every swing, something inside them hardened. Yet fear grew with strength. At night, people whispered in the bunkers. They spoke of the Deathworlders watching from the dark, measuring their every action. They feared the weapons were not gifts but traps, that each time they used them they became less human, more like the shadows above. Harris listened to these whispers, but he said nothing. He knew the truth. There was no turning back. The Deathworlders had given them now a path to peace, only 2 doors, survival or death, and the outpost had already stepped through one weeks past. The shields were rebuilt, stronger than before, powered by strange cores found in the Deathworlder crates. Towers were raised, weapons mounted, patrols set. The outpost was no longer just a mining station. It was becoming something else, something harder, something sharper. The people walked taller, their eyes colder. Even the children learned to hold the small blades, their tiny hands trembling but determined. Then the warning came. Scanners picked up movement at the edge of the system. Not raiders this time. Something larger, something organized. Dozens of ships, heavy and armed, moving in formation. The officers stared at the screens in terror. "This isn't raiders," one whispered. "This is a fleet." Panic spread through the outpost. If the raiders had been wolves, this was an army of lions, and now the miners had to face them, with nothing but weapons they barely understood. Above them the stars seemed to grow darker. Every eye turned upward, searching for the iron requiem. But it was gone. The Deathworlders had abandoned them to their trial, just as they had promised. In the council chamber, the voices rose again, louder, sharper. "Abandon the outpost!" one shouted. "Run, scatter! Maybe some of us will live." "Fight!" another yelled. "Fight with what we've been given. Prove we are not weak." The arguments tore at the air, but all turned to Harris in the end. The old commander stood slowly, his face lined with shadow. He looked at his people, at their scars, at their trembling hands clutching Deathworlder blades, and he spoke with a voice that carried across the hall. "There is no running," he said. "There is no rescue, no mercy, no second chance. We stand or we fall, we survive or we vanish." The words silenced the room. Even the children, listening from the halls outside, felt the weight of them. And in that silence, a choice was made. The miners would fight, not because they wanted to, not because they believed in victory, but because there was no other path left. That night, under the dim stars, the people of Outpost 47 armed themselves, men, women, and even the oldest among them carried weapons that hummed with alien power. The air was thick with fear, but also with something else. Something harder. Resolve. Far above, the fleet drew closer. Its engines lit the void with fire. Its weapons glowed red. The storm was coming, and the miners, once only workers in the dark, stood waiting with Deathworlder tools in their hands, ready to prove if they could endure, ready to face their trial. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. The sky above Outpost 47 burned with light. Engines flared. As the enemy fleet crossed into the system, dozens of ships, larger and deadlier than any raider craft, moved in perfect formation. Their weapons glowed red, their hulls black as shadow. It was not an attack of desperation, but an execution. The miners had sent an SOS, and now the galaxy had answered, not with help, but with war. Alarms screamed through the outpost. Men and women rushed to the walls, grabbing Deathworlder rifles and blades. Children were hidden in bunkers, though even they gripped small knives, unwilling to wait quietly. The old mining station had become a fortress, a place where survival was no longer a hope, but a command. Commander Harris stood on the watchtower, his face lit by the glow of enemy ships. His hands trembled, but his voice did not. "Remember their words," he shouted, his voice echoing across the walls. "Survive or be erased." The people answered with a roar, not of joy, but of defiance. They were miners, yes, but tonight they would be something else. The first wave struck. Enemy fighters screamed down like falling stars, their cannons tearing across the shields. The ground shook as explosions lit the fields, but the shields held, glowing with the strange energy of Deathworlder cores. On the walls, miners raised their rifles. The weapons growled, spitting fire that tore enemy ships apart. The recoil bruised shoulders, but no one faltered. Blades hissed as raiding craft landed. The enemy poured out, armored, snarling, armed with cruel weapons. But the miners charged to meet them. Iron clashed with alien steel. Sparks flew, blood spilled for every miner that fell. Two more rose behind them. They fought not with skill, but with fury. The fury of people who had nothing left to lose. The battle raged for hours. The sky thundered with explosions. The ground shook with fire. The air was filled with screams, both human and alien. The outpost burned, but it did not break. Every street became a battlefield, every home a fortress. Children threw firebombs from rooftops. Elders struck with blades they could barely lift. The weak did not hide. They fought because there was no hiding left. From the shadows of space, a new light appeared. The Iron Requiem. The Deathworlder ship had returned, its vast frame cutting across the stars. The miners saw it and cried out, hope flickering in their hearts. But the ship did not fire. It only watched, its dark hull silent. The voice echoed once more, cold and sharp. "This is your trial," it said. "Show us if you are prey or predators." The enemy fleet pressed harder. Capital ships rained fire on the shields, cracks spreading across the barrier. Harris knew they could not hold forever, but something inside him shifted. If this was a trial, then they would not beg. They would not send another SOS. They would fight until only ashes remained. He raised his blade. "Fight!" he roared. "Fight for every stone, every breath, every child." The people screamed with him, their voices a storm louder than the guns, and they charged. The shields shattered. The enemy flooded in, but the miners did not falter. Streets became rivers of fire. Alleys became traps. Deathworlder, more. Rifles tore holes through armored ranks. Blades split through bone and steel. The outpost was drowning in blood, but the miners stood tall. Every second they lived was stolen from the jaws of death. Then came the moment the enemy flagship descended, massive, armored, bristling with weapons. It hovered above the outpost, Like a mountain of iron, its cannons charged, ready to erase the colony in a single strike. The people looked up, their weapons useless against such power. Harris raised his eyes to the sky. If this was their end, they would face it standing. The flagship fired, but before the blast struck, the sky tore open. The iron requiem moved, its weapons awakening for the first time. A storm of fire poured from its cannons, beams of light slicing the flagship apart. The enemy ship split in two, burning as it fell into the void. The Deathworlders had spoken their judgment. The miners had endured long enough, fought hard enough. They had proven they were not weak. Silence fell as the enemy fleet broke. Leaderless, terrified, they scattered into the stars. The battle was over. The outpost still burned. Bodies lay in the dust, but it still stood. The people had survived. The comms crackled one final time. The Deathworlder voice returned, not cold, not warm, but sharp. You have faced the fire, and you did not break. You are not prey, not anymore. You are young, you are fragile, but you are ours now. You will stand, or you will burn with us. The words struck deeper than any blade. They were not a promise of peace, not a vow of friendship. They were a chain, forged in blood and fire. The miners had survived their trial, but in doing so, they had stepped onto a darker path, a path that led to war, to fear, to strength. The iron requiem turned, drifting back into the void, its shadow fading, its presence leaving a mark on every soul below. The people of Outp. Ost-47 stood among the ruins, their weapons still in hand. They were no longer miners, they were something else now, something the galaxy had not expected.